Hello, this is Bill Rood, the Grassroots Legalized Cannabis Party candidate for Congress in the 1st Congressional District. First, let me thank Winona State, the Faculty Senate's Government Relations Committee, and your American Democracy Project for allowing me to make this statement. You're probably wondering why I'm running for Congress as the Grassroots Party candidate. I've been unhappy with both Democrats and Republicans for years because both were dominated by special interests. I even ran for state representative in 1982 as a libertarian, though I never completely bought their philosophy. I've supported individual duopoly candidates who were anti-war and wanted to represent the people, though I've never been a partisan. I caucused with Democrats to support Dennis Kucinich, but 4 years later I caucused with Republicans to support Ron Paul. Neither of them were given a chance, so I voted for the Green Party candidates in both 2008 and 2012. In 2018, we had to choose between two Washington insiders for Congress, the scion of a Republican congressman who had worked as a congressional aide and liaison, or a Pentagon employee backed by the DNC. This year, I wanted my neighbors to have a better choice. I was too late petitioning to run as a minor party candidate, so I called Chris Wright, the chair of the Grassroots Legalized Cannabis Party. We decided my political positions were compatible with the party's, so I filed and have since been endorsed. But this is really not about the opposing candidates as individuals. It's about party leadership. All duopoly candidates, once elected, will bend to the will of party leadership. Even AOC defers to Nancy Pelosi on important issues like Venezuela and the CARES Act. Who do leaders like Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell represent? Billionaire donors, surely not you, and that goes for both parties. I've supported Democrats and been disappointed for much of my life, from Clinton's triangulation, NAFTA, and the repeal of Glass-Steagall to Obama's wars in Libya, Syria, Ukraine, and Yemen. Neither of these two parties represents the American people, but Democrats have raised evil to an entirely new level. They pushed the 3-year-long Russiagate hoax, followed in 2020 by deliberately creating chaos to undermine the November elections, all the while blaming Trump. Partisan holdovers from the Obama administration, under color of law, entrapped Trump's national security advisor, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, forced his resignation, and prosecuted him on bogus charges. They wanted to hamstring the incoming Trump administration and punish Flynn for his 2012 warning of an ISIS caliphate and for his subsequent criticism of Obama for willfully allowing it to happen. Biden and his influence peddling son are deeply corrupt, and Trump said torture was okay, that it was okay to punish the innocent families of terrorists, and that war is okay if you take their oil. He consummated all three evils by elevating Gina Haspel, killing 7-year-old Noura al-Awlaki, and plundering Syrian oil. Due to a virus no more dangerous than the seasonal flu, large corporations have increased their business, while small stores and restaurants were run out of business. The CARES Act included trillions for large corporations, but little for workers or struggling small business. Mitch couldn't have passed it without Nancy's help. If there's one thing both parties agree on, it's war. They passed a Pentagon budget increase that wasn't even requested, and when Trump wanted to withdraw from Afghanistan, they blocked it. The children of honest farmers and meat packers enlist patriotically, but when they return home with PTSD, the military finds ways to deprive them of benefits. Many are untreated and homeless. There will be no Medicare for all under Biden, who promised to veto it. Trump will continue the war on drugs to keep the CIA funded and the prisons full. Meanwhile, they distract us with witch hunts and wedge issues like abortion and gun laws, while destroying the Bill of Rights. None of this will change if we refuse to vote for third-party candidates. We've chosen the lesser of evils for over 50 years, and things keep getting worse. Stop repeating the same action, expecting different results. Thank you for listening. I've been asked to comment on why it's important for warriors to vote. Well, it's your future, isn't it? At 73, I'll be dead when you live that future, but I've seen past mistakes, can warn about them, and try to steer clear of them. It's important you vote for leaders who share your values, even if they're defeated this time. Your individual vote is really the only leverage you have. Make them come and get it. Don't vote for things you don't want, because you'll probably get them. Don't let the people who want bad things for you terrorize you into voting for them by claiming the other candidate is worse. We're at a crossroads, and it's not clear whether either main path will avoid a totalitarian regime justified by a virus no more dangerous than the flu, whose victims' average age is over 70, perhaps 82 in Massachusetts. The Democratic path virtually promises mandatory masks, forced vaccines, police state surveillance, violence, and travel restrictions for resistors. It's not clear the Republican path is any better. What with warp speed and the Trump medical team's rejection of hydroxychloroquine, the efficacy of which has been shown in several trials in favor of Fauci's favored remdesivir, which had no effect on morbidity during trials, though it does generate nice profits for Gilead and Fauci. So we'll likely see the Bill of Rights further eroded or canceled outright if we take either of those paths. I don't know how you feel or what you've been taught in school nowadays, but I learned that our ancestors, many of them youths at the time, knowingly sacrificed their lives in the revolution to secure the ideals embodied in the Bill of Rights. Then again in the Civil War to implement those ideals for all people. Then once again during the Civil Rights era to reinstate rights stolen by Jim Crow. I will not willingly sacrifice your lifelong rights or those of my children and grandchildren out of fear that my long life will be perhaps 6 months shorter due to an opportunistic infection when I'm already sick. We all need to display a bit of courage in the face of this threat to our liberties. So I say, reject either of the main Republican paths and show politicians how you really feel, what you really believe. There are several alternatives to them on the presidential ballot, and I'm giving you an alternative for the 1st Congressional District. I've also been asked about my perspectives on higher ed. My stepdaughter just graduated from Winona State's nursing program, and her final semester was impacted by the hysteria over COVID. But other than that, and missing the Great River Shakespeare Festival this summer, I really don't know much about Winona State's programs. Speaking of Shakespeare, after Romeo restrains Mercutio and he is fatally wounded by Tybalt's opportunistic thrust, Mercutio laments, "A plague of both your houses." Well, that's my feeling toward the Montagues and Capulets of US politics, as well as toward all those obsessed with their own identity or too afraid to speak up for people and values under attack for fear of being labeled sexist, racist, or homophobic. You ask, what does that have to do with academia? Well, as I said, I don't know about Winona State's programs, but much of academia is infected with critical theory and postmodernism, which has led to critical race theory and other intolerant ideologies that shame and scapegoat all whites, all males, heterosexual and cisgendered people, while treating all those not scapegoated as blameless victims with no agency and no accountability for their own actions. This has led to such absurdities as dumping a statue of Hans Christian Heg, an abolitionist who died at Chickamauga, into a Madison lake, or the claim that STEM is a white supremacist construct designed to keep non-whites down, and that there is no objective truth outside your own lived experience. In the real world, the objective truth is that STEM is a significant route to liberation from poverty, but only those with agency can apply the required discipline and hard work. Such absurd ideologies are inherently nihilistic. They are the real supremacist ideas, designed to convince people they are victims, have no agency, and may just as well give up. They aren't worthy of academia, but they must be countered with calm, rational thought, not censorship. I believe in academic freedom, and I support women's studies, Hispanic studies, Black history, and even the teaching of overtly Marxist theories. When I was in college half a millennia ago, a Black history course was important for me because much had been left out of historical survey and literature classes. Today, Heroes like Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, W.E.B. Du Bois, Ida B. Wells, and Susan B. Anthony should be and are integrated into more general classes. Specialized courses and even departments still have value, but they should not be required for graduation, and their adherents should not be allowed to deplatform opposing ideas they find offensive. One's own academic freedom ends where another's begins. Freedom of speech must be firmly defended by university administrators, no matter the claims of those of some victims groups. If somebody needs a safe space, they can find a private place where they won't have to listen. I'm glad my stepdaughter received training in a useful, employable field. That should be the main mission of our colleges and universities, not the training of revolutionaries. Winona State should continue on that path and leave the training of revolutionaries to elite institutions where truly privileged folk send their children. Erica's nursing degree was worth the expense, but still too high. College costs have increased at a rate far exceeding inflation, largely due to bankruptcy reform. Before that reform, a cosigner was often required. Cosigners have an incentive to keep debt low and to counsel students to pursue programs that will enable them to discharge the debt. That would have put a brake on the acceleration of college costs. We paid half of Erica's debt, and I don't think most loans should be totally forgiven, but they should be interest-free. Payments should be based on income, and the principal forgiven where fraud is involved, such as Globe, or perhaps after several years of faithful payment. Climate change, particularly anthropomorphic global warming, is not the issue I'm most concerned about. While the temperature increase since the start of the industrial period has been legitimately alarming, the Earth has also been recovering from a little ice age of 500 years ago, which was the coldest time since the start of the Holocene epoch 10,000 years ago. In fact, temperatures today are about what they were 2,000 years ago and are cooler than the average since the end of the last glaciation. I'm more concerned with environmental pollution, but even that is not as big a threat as nuclear war or the loss of our fundamental rights as embodied in the Bill of Rights. Renewable energy like wind, solar, tidal, and other hydroelectric power has environmental costs and other problems, such as mining of rare earth elements, lithium, and other raw materials, disposal of turbine blades, the need for backup power, and the useful lifetime of equipment. If you haven't seen Planet of the Humans, you should. There's no easy solution, but hopeful progress on fusion power is being made. MIT has a design for a self-sustaining fusion reactor that would produce more energy than it consumes, using superconducting magnets that have recently been developed. They hope to have an operational reactor by 2025, but it would be another 10 years to develop commercially feasible reactors. Government should not be subsidizing any type of commercial energy production, though research should receive funding, such as the Fusion Project. Nor should government or industry trample on treaty rights. The Lakota should have had as much say in the routing of DAPL as the people of Mandan. So I went to Standing Rock in late 2016 to support the water protectors. Wind and solar are actually cheaper than fracked hydrocarbons and tar sands, which are really not economically feasible even in the intermediate term. Unfortunately, many other polluting industries are feasible in the short and intermediate term because they socialize their externalities. When we try to hold corporations accountable for externalities, such as groundwater pollution, they end up paying far less than the total economic cost. So in the short to intermediate term, it's just a cost of doing business. As we become more aware of externalized costs over the years, some polluting corporations go bankrupt, but past shareholder dividends and executive compensation are protected from liability, like the shareholders and executives of Johns Manville or Monsanto. It's best to prohibit the externalities in the first place. What concerns me most is all the toxins we're releasing into the biosphere. such as glyphosate and neonicotinoids. Without bees, a lot of things die, including maybe us. Our waste is a huge problem. China no longer accepts our garbage. I don't understand why they ever did. Government should be able to regulate so-called disposable items and packaging materials. If they can't readily be recycled, they should be phased out and replaced with biodegradable or burnable, which would at least produce energy. I'm not sure why we don't still use Excelsior. I've been asked to comment on the very complicated issue of immigration. It's a cliche that America is a nation of immigrants, not in the sense that the phrase has become meaningless, but because it's so true that people rarely think of it or evaluate it. I want it to remain that way. The US, in accordance with international norms, must always welcome refugees. But that doesn't mean our government shouldn't control our borders to protect the interests of people already here. If you really listen to our minority communities, you'll find that many oppose illegal immigration because it's a threat to their economic progress. Cesar Chavez opposed illegal immigration, and if you watched the AfroSynergy channel on YouTube, you'll find its host opposes it as well. Large corporations love undocumented immigration because it provides them with a large pool of workers who are afraid to unionize or complain to government authorities about low pay, wage theft, or safety concerns. It's often claimed that immigrants, and particularly undocumented immigrants, take jobs that US workers don't want. The truth is, they take jobs at wage levels and under safety conditions unacceptable to US citizens and permanent residents. My recommendations are that we first secure our borders and eliminate current undocumented entry. Second, we must restrict legal entry to those who will be economically secure long-term. No temporary work visas. Corporations that want to sponsor a new immigrant employee must be required to document that no US citizen or permanent resident with the skills to do the work is available to fill that job at any price, not just the price that they want to pay. Individual sponsors must guarantee that the immigrant will not become eligible for welfare or unemployment and must be financially capable of keeping those guarantees. Third, both corporate and individual sponsors must be subject to penalties if the immigrant applies for government assistance, not the immigrant. Fourth, once an immigrant is permitted and attains permanent resident status, his or her entire immediate family should also be admitted. Fifth, when undocumented immigrants and their employers are discovered, we must enforce with justice and humanity. The employer must be dealt with severely enough to discourage future such behavior. The immigrant's status must be evaluated based on many criteria, such as ties to the community, the length of residency, age at entry, language skills, status of spouse and children, and whether an immediate family member present legally might be forced to seek government assistance if the immigrant is deported. Temporary work visas, such as H-1B visas, have been devastating for skilled workers. Thousands of skilled engineers, programmers, and others have been laid off and unable to find work at commensurate pay. In many cases, after the temporary workers are trained, they return to the home country and become part of the offshoring problem. Unskilled temporary workers tend to contribute to the instability of local society and culture. Temporary work visas are also harmful to families left behind in the country of origin. This is why I oppose temporary work visas such as H-1B and H-2A. There is no question that vestiges of racism are still a problem in the US today. The lack of police accountability and thin blue line of silence are also problems. Racism and police brutality become especially ugly when they intersect. Racism also became obvious in many Tea Party demonstrations and the birther movement after Barack Obama was elected. We must denounce such racism whenever and wherever we see it. We must also correct institutional faults that encourage or fail to discourage the bad behavior that afflicts many institutions, not just the police. An example is qualified immunity. That legal doctrine makes it almost impossible to sue a police officer or other government official for damages. As a result, the government itself, and therefore the taxpayers, usually pay damages. Eliminating that shield would cause police officers to think twice before brutalizing a citizen, because he and his family might lose their home, or his ability, or his liability insurance might skyrocket. It's very difficult to convict a police officer of murder when he can claim he thought his life was threatened. And one of the reasons such prosecutions so seldom succeed is that the standard of proof in criminal trials is beyond a reasonable doubt. The standard of proof in civil trials is the preponderance of evidence. Thus, police could be effectively sued for their actions and held financially liable, even if criminally acquitted or unindicted. This would apply to Daniel Shaver, a young white man terrorized and killed by police, as well as to Breonna Taylor. So yes, there are many problems to be fixed, but we should be careful how we go about fixing them. Talleyrand famously said, "It's worse than a crime, it's a mistake." When it comes to fixing social problems, it's both a moral error, that is a crime, and a mistake to blame or scapegoat all whites, all males, or all police officers for all of society's problems, because it leads to moral outrage and backlash in individual members of targeted groups, and because it leaves some bad actors unaccountable because they are non-white or female. Scapegoating makes enemies of people who would otherwise be allies. We need to unify the working class rather than split it up into warring factions. That just empowers the elite strategy of divide and rule. Privilege is a multifaceted thing. I was privileged in that both my parents were college graduates, and I attended well-funded suburban schools with highly qualified teachers, where discipline problems were rare. Most of my peers went to college. Did I have white privilege because the only non-white student was Japanese? Actually, I think de facto segregation diminished me. Perhaps freedom from oppression is a form of privilege, but I'm not going to go to some Appalachian or Rust Belt town and lecture those people about their white privilege when their unemployment rate is over 10%. Nor should I lecture the people of Oberlin, Ohio about how they uphold white supremacy and are accountable for all the evils of slavery when Oberlin was very involved with the Underground Railway. We must acknowledge the past, all the past, both good and bad, before we can fix today's problems and build a better future. Ignoring the good in America results in nihilistic acts like defacing a monument to the Black troops of the 54th Massachusetts Voluntary Infantry or a bust of Frederick Douglass. If there's nothing worth saving, the only thing left is to destroy everything, nihilism. What will replace it? The leaders of the BLM Global Network and Antifa don't seem to be telling us, but I think the elites who are funding them and encouraging them know exactly what they want. They want to replace the Bill of Rights with a medically justified police state, a global reset to totalitarianism. I reject that. Our failure to implement and protect all the ideals embodied in the Declaration of Independence, Constitution, Bill of Rights, and Gettysburg Address does not make these documents evil instruments of white supremacy. Thank you.